Hi everybody, Dave Curley here, and I wanted to share a technique with my fellow developers that I half stumbled upon, half developed while I was creating one of my Alexa skills. And it's a way to provide your skill with a seemingly inexhaustible supply of responses, or at least a huge variety of ways of delivering your skill responses. So this is my skill that we're going to use here in this example. It's called Excuse Me, and Excuse Me is just a bit of fun, and it serves up an inexhaustible list of excuses for why you don't want to do something, or why you were late for work, or any other sticky situation. And so it's just a bit of fun, but I wanted it to be engaging, so I wanted enough different responses so that if people played it for 5 or 10 minutes, they wouldn't get bored quickly. So I needed to come up with a way of doing that, and as you'll see, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. So the challenge here is, if you've got a fact type skill, and Excuse Me is kind of a fact type skill, the facts generally don't change. So you only have a certain number of facts on a topic, and repeating the same fact spoken in the same way is a sure way to lose user interest and engagement. Even between sessions, so within a session, certainly you don't want to do that. And between sessions, you really don't want to do that either, because if people come back to your skill, you want to reward them with fresh content. And once they do lose interest, they're unlikely to come back to your skill. So it's worth putting in a little bit of effort just to ensure that type of engagement. Okay, so what can a developer do? Well, I came up with 3 possible approaches. You might have others. One is to curate a huge pool of, in my case, excuses. And I would have to keep refreshing that regularly, because I would only be capable of coming up with maybe a few thousand excuses. Eventually, they would repeat. And the second way would be to find an online feed and connect to that using RSS or something like that to find fresh content constantly. But if you do that, you're relying on someone else to provide good quality content, keep it clean, keep it short, all that kind of thing. And reliable. You have to make sure that feed stays up, or your skill is done. So the third approach is the one I took, which is to create an apparently large content pool using the power of maths, and we'll see what I mean by that just in a second. Okay, so here's an example. This is Excuse Me. It's a large built-in list of homemade and curated excuses, but we would have exhausted that very quickly. Even by playing it for 5 minutes, you would be likely to find some repeat content. So the solution was, I wanted to generate skill responses using sentence fragments. And I looked at the type of responses I was giving and realized that they more or less follow the same pattern. Somebody did something to something. So the dog ate my homework, kind of thing. So that helped quite a lot. And here's what I came up with. So I now have inside the node.js module for my Lambda function that services this skill. I now have 3 arrays. There's one for actors, one for actions, and one for objects. These can take different names, and you'll see that I'm not consistent with the names, but basically you have 3 things. And when it comes to generating the output for Alexa to speak, I randomly pick an actor, an action, and an object, put them together in a sentence, and Alexa says the right thing. My dentist accidentally set fire to my raincoat. The dog ate my homework. Here's how it looks in the code itself, the Lambda function. That's my 3 arrays. I'll just put some generic content in here to make it clear, but you would have real examples of people, actions, and things in here. In the intent handler itself, I wait until I need to do the output in the getExcuse intent event handler here. And so I generate the speech output from a random selection from, I've called them who, did what, and to whom here to make it even clearer. I just pick one from each of those arrays and I send that to Alexa. Random phrase is straight from the GitHub examples that you find for fact skills. So random phrase just randomly picks an element from an array. And I have another intent that allows the user to ask the skill how many possible responses there are, how many possible excuses there are. This is how I calculate it. And this leads on to my next point, which is that you can generate very large content pools very quickly. So it's basically the length of these 3 arrays multiplied together, and you add the custom excuses. Here's how the math works. Number of possible responses, excuses in my case, is the number of built-in ones, the custom ones, plus the multiplication of the lengths of those three arrays. And here's an example. If I just had 200 built-in responses and 50 of each of those arrays, I would end up with 125,000 possible excuses. Here are a few things to keep in mind. You do need to pay very close attention to your sentence fragments to make sure that each actor goes well with each action. So if you go through the actors and the actions together and make sure they sound right in a sentence, you've done your job. Do the same thing with the actions and the objects. Just make sure they all make sense. So you do need to do a lot of testing. Generate only what you need. You don't have to build the 125,000 possible responses. You only need the 50, the 50, and the 50. And then you randomly select as needed. You don't need a database or any sort of external HTTP to an endpoint, anything like that. You can build all this inside a Lambda function. So why do all this? Well, it will increase the variety in your Elixir skill responses, which should lead to better engagement in your skill. Especially if it becomes popular, it allows you to develop a large content pool very quickly, much quicker than you could if you were to curate content. It eliminates any trips to AWS services. And at the moment, these are free because most of us are within the free tier on AWS if we're using any other services at all. But in the future, if you have a very popular skill and you're constantly fetching things from databases, either a DynamoDB or out to an HTTPS, you're moving data around Amazon's cloud. Those are services that they charge for. So a good way to think of it in advance is reduce the traffic flow as much as possible. You don't have to do just this, and in my case, I have a large built-in response pool as well of interesting excuses that I found and came up with myself. And I combine that with the generated excuses, but the generated excuses, they make up the bulk of the content pool. Here are some other ways we can use this technique. You can still use this technique, and it does help quite a lot with things like preambles to your responses. You don't always want to say, here's one, or here's another one. You want some variety. So you could build an array with, 20 different preambles in there to go before your actual response. And it would just sound a bit more conversational, a bit more like you're talking to a human being than talking to a machine. And the same thing for reprompts. Okay, so there's my skill again. I would encourage you to take a look at this technique. Think about using it for your own skills. If it doesn't fit the mold, you can still use it for preambles and reprompts and other parts of your response content.